So the last couple of weeks, we've been in a series about the book of Ephesians, and so I guess it's been like a month or over now. So if you've been with us, congratulations. You're starting to ask yourself, how long is this book? We've been in this a long time. If you haven't been with us the entire time, we'd love for you to catch up. There's just a lot of important context when we talk about the book of Ephesians. It helps kind of pull this whole thing together. We've taken a turn here in the last couple of weeks into the really practical parts of how the gospel affects our lives. First couple of weeks, we spent time talking about the power of the gospel that's available to us, that Jesus offers as a gift to us in forgiveness and salvation, and how that continues to work in our lives. And then the book kind of takes a turn where Paul starts to talk to the group of Ephesians, who are actually a group of people. They were a church in the Bible times, and starts to tell them how to practically apply this in their lives. So we'd love for you to catch up on that. And this week, we're actually going to be talking about family and relationships. So this will be a really awesome week. I'm excited about it, get passionate about it. I want to start by just reading the passage, and then we'll come back here and talk about it a little bit. If you want to turn to Ephesians 5, you can read along with me. We're starting verse 21. If you have a Bible, if you want to use the YouVersion app on your phone. If you don't have a Bible, there's some in the seats underneath in front of you. And if you don't have one, you can take that home with you. We'd love for you to have that. So Ephesians 5, starting in verse 21, says this: "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does his church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." So there's a lot going on in this passage, right? I realize that. And I could probably teach at least a week on each of these three relationships we're going to talk about, but I don't want to keep you here for days at a time. So here's what we're going to do. And it doesn't mean if you're not married or you don't have kids, you're like, yay, I can sleep in church today. I mean, you do what you want, but you should listen, right? You still have to listen. It's important for us when we go into this passage to remember the context in which we're talking this in, right? Paul is presenting this to a group of people as an example. And here's something that's really important. In verse 32, he says he's talking about Christ in the church. Right? This whole book of Ephesians, what we're hearing about is the love of Christ for us through the gospel in our lives and how that begins to impact our lives. So when we read passages about husbands and wives and children and parent relationships, we're not talking about like here's like the rules and here like it. We're talking about it in the context of the love of Christ. So if it doesn't fit in the love of Christ, it doesn't fit in the definition for marriage or for parenting. And so we're going to make sure that we start to bring that context up because it's really important for how you read this passage. When we start to talk about this, I think Paul brings it up, these examples, because he knows some things. God knew some things as well about this, is that a lot of our pain in life comes from family relationships. Right? I think if most of us sat down in this room, all of us would be able to identify some part of our lives that has some pain connected to a marriage, a parent, a child, right? A family relationship in one of these kind of three areas. And not just like a little bit of pain, like extremely damaging. Right? I think that Paul is communicating that what Christ knows to be true is that family, right, matters a ton. And it really, really can have an impact on our lives. They're the first to erode sometimes when things are going on that are painful. what starts to happen is that pain. We start to think different things about life. And really what we start to realize looking back is, parents might have been doing the best that they could with what they had, right? That maybe they weren't. Some of that pain was on purpose, but you might have been on the receiving end. The bottom line is it's painful, right? Many of us have pain, so we kind of have to figure out what to do with that. And I think most of us would say, I want to do that differently than what I experienced. Right? I want to be a different parent than my parent was to me. Or there's at least some things I want to change. I want to be a different husband than my dad was to my mom. I want to be a different wife, right? We start to think about all of those things. Right? All of this is painful. And here's the thing is many of us have experienced Christ, and many of those people in our lives may have experienced Christ, but we struggle to let it change our family. Sometimes because it's really hard. There's generations of things happening, right? There's cycles that need to be broken. And sometimes it just looks impossible, and we don't even want to touch it. Now, if they couldn't do it, I probably can't either, right? We're just going to have to do with what we got. But when we talk about the identity that becomes part of us when we have a relationship with Christ, right? What we've talked about earlier in Ephesians, how it literally changes who we are when we have identity in Christ. It starts to affect every area of our lives, and that is what can give us the power to change some of these things. I think there's kind of two things that are really true. Is family is probably the hardest place to win with consistency and longevity. I think it takes the most work. Almost anything I've ever done in my life, you probably know that to be true. Our family knows us. They see us all the time, right? They often see us at our worst. They're often on the receiving end of our worst, right? And vice versa, right? We see the worst of our family. But here's what I also believe to be true, is that family is a place where the gospel has the most ability to impact our lives and our world. And I believe it starts in the family. So here's the thing is that we know that it's going to be really hard, right? It might seem impossible, all of those things. The most heart-wrenching thing that I see on a regular basis just in what I do is people at the end of life or people after they lose a loved one, and their main regrets, the thing that people are most torn up about is usually family relationship stuff, right? Pain that never got addressed, things they never said, things they didn't feel like they could change, right? It's just really painful. So the question becomes, okay, what can we do about this? And here's when we read these passages, what I believe is we're not going to solve everything in this room today. We'd be here forever. But we can start out with a good example of these relationships that many of us may have never had, right? That many of us have maybe never seen. But we have to remember that these are being looked at through a lens of the love of Christ, right? That's what's going to happen there. So let's look at this first relationship we see here is husbands and wives. I think it's important to say here what this passage is not first, because this one can be heard a lot of different ways, right? Especially when it starts out with a word like submit. You're like, I'm interested to see where this goes, right? And here's what I want to say. This is not a statement about a position of women to men. This is not a statement about a power dynamic. This is nothing about that. Because in this passage, if you read it, what does it say? A wife to her husband, right? A husband to his wife, right? It is about spouses, right? So it's not a statement or a generalization. It is about one man to his wife and one wife to her husband. And this has to have a direct connection to the love of Christ, right? That is because what it's saying is like Christ is the head of the church, right? It has to reflect that. So if this is read or being used, it cannot be used to lord over someone. It's not used for leverage. It's not used to gain control, right? That is not what it is. When we read like even this passage about husband and wives, here's what we would see here is this submission that is talked about says in the beginning it says husbands and wives, right? It's not just limited to that, right? What it starts to say, or what we see here is it has nothing to do with position to each other. There's no power dynamic. What it does is it has everything to do with deep love for one another, just like Christ has for us. So this is not a power thing. See, even Jesus' submission was not a requirement for him, right? You remember when Jesus submitted to the will of the Father, it was a willing submission. But why was it that? Right? Because of the body of work that exists, right? There was trust there that was built on love that the Father had for him. And so in the same way, when we're trying to carry out a marriage the way that God would define it as husbands and wives, it is trust built on love that makes this work. And if there is no trust, it doesn't work. If there is no love, it doesn't work, right? It has to be done together. It's actually a mutual submission by choice. Does that make sense? That's the way that Christ starts to look at us that way. So it's a willingness of that. This passage actually becomes, when we talk about husbands and wives, it's two people that are agreeing to look at each other and say, I'm going to give the best of what I have to you. And then the other person's looking back, and I'm going to give the best of what I have to you. And here's how this works, because as a husband, even in my life, it's not that I'm just like dictating how life is going to work, right? That's not what it is. It's not, submission is not a call to just be ordered around. When we do this together, when we're both doing our part, if I consistently love my family, if my decisions are made by loving my family, all of my decisions are driven out of love for my family in the way that Christ is asking me to do it. Right? That's what I'm trying to do. So when I come to my wife and we make decisions all the time. I had to make a decision recently. You're like, I make 1,000 a day, right? You ever run out of like decision-making ability and you're like, can someone else just care because I have run out of ability, right? When I come, it's not that she's like, aye, Captain. Like there's no like dynamic like that. What this is I have a body of work here, right? Over time, I have aspired to love my family this way. And so because of the body of work where I have loved my family, sacrificed and tried to do it the way that God has asked me to do, my wife is able to trust that body of work. And she's like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, you have a really good history of making decent decisions, right? That's what we're talking about, right? There's no, does she ever have a disagreement with what I'm saying? Yeah, absolutely. We talk about it, right? It becomes a relationship there in that way. And this all goes back to the context of Christ's love for us, right? Paul is talking about marriage in the context of that love. Because look at how it works with Christ in us. Why am I able to trust Christ with my life and tell him I want him to have control of my life? Because when I go to the Bible and I start to read this story, it is an entire story. It's a body of work of Christ trying to love me, to have a relationship with me. So when I come across a passage in the Bible that literally just calls me out, right? You ever had that? You're like, whoopsies. And you're like, my life has to change. Am I like, yes, sir, Jesus, sir? Like, that's a weird thing. I don't know why I did that. I got to come up with something else. But like, it's not like I'm just like falling in line because I'm afraid or I don't want to cause any waves. It's because I trust the body of work that Christ has shown me over time. He's proven himself to be trustworthy. He's proven to love me when I screw up every time. He's proven to help me move forward in my life with things I thought could never move forward. And so in the same way, right, the husband and wife relationship is a direct reflection of the relationship that Christ has with us. Right? That's what Paul's saying at the end of the passage. He's like, I'm talking about Christ and the church. He's like, that is how you're supposed to love. And so it becomes a relationship but if the body of work isn't present, there is no trust, right? If there's no trust, there's no unity, right? All of those things start to go away. So marriage is going to work this way. Both people have to love each other in that way with the help of Christ. So husbands, right? We are called to love our wives in the way that Christ loves the church. And by the way, the Bible would say and show that he was obedient and submitted to the Father and loved the church so much that he gave his life for the church, right? So we're giving our lives to our wives. We want to lead them in that way, serving them and striving to make that relationship look more and more like Christ. But without Christ, this becomes authoritarian, becomes demanding, it becomes controlling when Christ's love is absent from it. So it's in the context of Christ. Wives, when we look at this passage, you're not submitting, you're not agreeing to be ordered around for the rest of your life. What you're saying is you're starting a relationship with someone where you are saying, I trust you in your body of work. Like, I trust that you already love me, that you're loving me this way, and you're committing to love me that way. And I'm going to trust that, right? And I want to be led deeper into relationship with Christ with you. I want to lead our family that way. And yes, your opinion matters. And yes, you're allowed to say things. All of that other nonsense is garbage, right? What you're doing is saying, I'm going to give my best of myself to my husband when that body of work is there. Because without Christ, what does that become, right? Submission becomes oppressive, right? It becomes a silencer, and it becomes a means to get control and assert the will of one human over another. So the context, the love of Christ has to be there. We've all seen marriages where there's no unity in this way. Maybe from a kid looking at your parents, maybe you've just watched it happen and you see how difficult it is for families to be thriving in that way. The bottom line is this, is that as a couple, if you're married, you're a team. You're united around the same thing. You're giving the best to each other and in turn to your families. It has to happen with Christ leading the way. The next relationship I want to talk about here is parents. This is a big one for me. I could talk about this for 6 weeks. Again, I don't want to keep you here for that long. So when we look at parents, really what we're doing as parents, if we are a parent of kids, is we are stewards of our children, right? Our children, like everything else that we have on this earth, is a blessing given to us by God. And so in the same way that I would be a good steward of my money and to provide for my family the best that I can, a good steward of my resources and my time, our kids count as that as well. So we want to look at the Lord to see how should our family live? How should we raise our kids? So our goal is to bring them up based on what Christ says. Right, the verse where in 6:4 it would say to bring them up in training and instruction of the Lord. That means we're looking to him to see what we should do. Right, sin's going to affect us. We're going to fail. Right, we need to model forgiveness. We need to model compassion. We need to model all of that. But here's what we start to do is we're not just like caring for kids, right? We're doing this in the Lord. We are actually raising adults, right? You are taking a human being and you're like unfolding them all the way until they get into adulthood, right? That's what we're doing. So parents, our job is not to make our kids happy. You're like, I've been telling them that for weeks. You can take them to get ice cream. They're allowed to be happy. You should try to make them happy sometimes. But your bottom line goal is not to make your kids happy. Right? It's to guide them, to help them gain independence so that they can have the best chance possible at knowing and understanding life with Christ and be a fully functioning adult. Right? That's what we're doing. And so you can't protect them from everything, and you can't just not parent them at all. Right? You have to find somewhere in the middle, and you're going to not make them happy. So if you do it right, sometimes they're going to be upset at you, which is okay. Early on, we do a lot with kids, right? We do a ton with them, and later on in life, we do less, but maybe different work. I love Ryan Rodman, one of the pastors here, gave the example of this a while ago, talking about kids where it was like a bow and arrow. I'm going to give it really short, and I'm not drawing on the whiteboard of it. But he gave this example of a bow and arrow where in the beginning of life, we draw our kids close to us, right? And then at some point, we aim them, and then we let them go. Right? That was a really condensed version of that. He could probably write a book on it. But that's what we're doing, right? We're aiming them. At some point, we got to let them go. So moms and dads, we actually have this incredible opportunity to shepherd our kids in the way that Christ loves them, with Christ's love at the forefront. It starts with us having a marriage that is defined by that. And then as parents, we get to do this. I love what it says here. It says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in training of the Lord. What does that actually mean? Another version would say, don't provoke them to anger, right? And I think it says fathers, but I think this is, I skipped that too soon. You saw it. Surprise, ruined. It says fathers, but really when we talk about parents, we're doing this together. But I think we also all know that dad's words hit a little different sometimes, right? We can probably all identify with that. You're like, dad didn't say a lot, but when he said that, I definitely remember it, right? It's like it just hits a little different in that way. But this idea of provoking someone to anger, that would actually look like something that's done over time that creates dissonance, that creates pain, that creates, right? That's not just a one-time thing. It's like, hey, don't make your kids mad. What it's saying is don't over time do things that are going to provoke them to anger. And this is a big one because I think most of us could probably point to childhood wounds as a real thing in our life. And many times it's those types of things done over time that lead to bitterness, just distance in relationships. We're not quite sure how to trust this person, right? And believe me, if you're raising kids, I think you are going to have some level of this no matter what you do, right? My kids will be in counseling. If I knew what it was going to be for, I would fix it. But it's just like, there's 3 of them. So I'm trying my best, right? And I'm doing what I can. So the goal is not to be perfect. Don't hear me. Don't hear me wrong. But here's some things I think we can do as to not exasperate. I think these are some common ways that it happens most of the time. Right, as parents, we don't want to just be overprotecting them all the time, right? We can't protect them from everything. Things are going to happen. We need to help them learn how to deal with things rather than just protect them from things. At my house, we call this doing dangerous things carefully. I have 2 young boys, 5 and 3 now, and my oldest was getting mad at some point that the tools that he got for toys weren't real. He's like, this hammer sucks, Dad. Like, it just breaks in half when I hit this nail. And I'm like, okay, you want to use my hammer? And I'm like, that's a lot for a 4-year-old, right? And so I knew I could hear him he's like, Dad, can I have some nails? I'm like, sure, buddy. I know he's going to hit his thumb. I just know it's going to happen. And so I hear him around the corner, go, and I hear, it stops, and then I hear the hammer drop. And he comes around the corner, right? I'm like, oh man, buddy, I'm sorry. That happened to me. I told him a story about when it happened to me, and he thought that was great, right? These things happen all the time. The other day I went outside, and my son has a hand saw, like an old school saw, and it was like a cartoon, like a Looney Tunes thing outside, where one cartoon character's sawing, the other one's ducking underneath it, and then they had a second saw. I don't really know where that one came from, but they're going on this tree, and they're like, Dad, check this out. We're cutting this tree, and I was like, cool. Hope we didn't want that, but they're just cutting the branches, so it's fine. So I'm like, okay, I need to stop this. I need to help them do this in a way that's safer. I'm going to teach them how to do it, right? And of course, if they're in a situation where they're going to be irreparably harmed, I'm going to stop it. But we're guiding them, right? We can't protect them from everything. So we don't want to overprotect them, because over time they're going to get to the end of life and be like, hi, have fun at college. And they're like, I don't know how to do anything. I didn't, we want to help them take step towards independence. Spent a long time on that one. Didn't need to. The next one is this idea of comparison, right? You've often maybe heard it said that comparison is the thief of joy. Right, when we have kids and we're raising them, we don't want to compare them to other people and other people's kids, right? We want to try to embrace them for who they are, what they're good at, right? And believe me, there's times where I'm like, man, this quality is one that I would like for you to possess that your sibling possesses, but you're your own person, right? So I want to help love them for who they are. I don't want to compare them to all these other things, right? I want to embrace them and help them. Another one that I think about is this idea of achievement at all costs, right? Many times as parents, we have this idea we want to live out some of our dreams. We want them to do things that are great, which is not bad at all to have vision for them. But when we start living our sports dreams, academic dreams, or career dreams through our kids, it gets really difficult when that's the thing that we care the most about over time, right? It's fine for them to try things. It's fine for them to do things, but we always, at the end of the day, want them to know we're trying to help you figure out what you're talented at and help you build up a strength in an area so you can go use that wherever Christ calls you to go, right? It's not about just ultimate achievement, because most of your kids aren't going to be in the NBA. Sorry if I'm the first person that told you that, but it's fine. Right? Our goal is to help them discover who has God made them to be. What things are they good at, right? Do they have to be on the most winningest soccer team for 4th graders of all time? No, probably not. They'll probably be okay just playing soccer a couple years, right? You have to figure something out, but we don't want to make that a means by over time we create distance. Here's a big one for me. This has been one that I've had to work on over time is words in our kids' lives. My wife has helped me embrace this in a deep way that has helped me actually have new vision for my kids with the words I say, right? She would say to me often, your words have power over our kids. I'm like, I guess that's true. I just say things a lot. I have ADD. They just come out. You have to, the thoughts come out before they're finished. Right, but to be thoughtful about my words and this idea of encouragement and discouragement, right? I don't think you can ever over-encourage a kid. I really don't think it's possible. Most of us are very well aware of what we've done wrong. I see it in my boys' faces when they've done something wrong, and I walk in and they're like, I'm like, it's okay, buddy, I love you. Can't do that again, right? You know what you did, right? We have words, right? My first instinct, when I see things that are happening, like I said, I'm a verbal processor. So I'm like, what's wrong with you, right? That's and it's funny, but over time, right? That is something that kids will absorb, the words that we say. And so my wife has helped me understand that in a deep way that I can carry weight. And so I want to say the right things. I don't think you can ever tell kids you love them enough. I'll never forget this playing out in front of me. One time I tell my kids I love them 100 times a day, 500 times if I can. And I like saying it. It's probably a thing that I'm like, I wanted to hear this more. But I say it to them all the time. And so they'll say it back. And somebody said to me one time, hey, you tell your kids you love them a lot. And I was like, yeah? They're like, well, it's just that I don't think I ever did that. And I was like, what? I was confused, right? And what I realized is, hey, it's never too late to start that. And I watched it play out in front of me where they started telling their adult sons that they love them. And I watched it play out, and I was like, this is amazing. And it was really impactful, even later in life. So we want to help them understand the words that we want, right? We want to speak truth to them, encouragement to them, help give them life through words. Another one is this idea of not, it's not an idea, it's a real thing. This failure to sacrifice one. This one hurts a lot, right? As a parent, as a guy, my expectations went down a lot when I became a father. I enjoy things that work, things that aren't broken, scuffed up. So in our house, we went through about 4 toilet handles last month. So really hitting the top of the quota for toilet handles. I don't know what we're doing to them, but they were like RKOing them. I don't know, but we are going through them at an alarming rate. So I might buy stock in that. So, right, I had to sacrifice some of the things that I did, some of the things that I spent my money and time on, and just some of my expectations for how things were going to be. Right? I did not know how much was going to be broken with kids. I was like, let's send them outside. They can't break outside. Boy, was I wrong. Break the outside too. Right? It's like everything. So I had to bring my expectation. I was like, come on, man. Just like, you can do all this stuff, but don't mess with my lawn lines. I like the lines in the lawn. I like things to be tidy here. And they're like, no, I'm not about that. And I'm like, oh, dear. Should I be afraid of you? But anyways, we have to sacrifice for our kids, right? And I think if any of the things in our lives take precedent over our families, right, our wives or kids, we know that we are going to need to change that, right? When anything becomes more important, and we're not willing to miss it, give it up, or go without it, we might need to change that. Doesn't mean you can't have any fun, mom and dads. You're still allowed to have fun. You're allowed to have hobbies, right? But we know it takes priority there. Another thing is expecting our kids to be adults now. I don't know how many times you kind of want to speed that up sometimes. You're like, hey, could you get this? Like potty training, discipline, whatever it is, right? You're like, could they get this? But here's a thing is over time, we don't want to just say to a literal baby, like, quit being a baby, right? That's who they are. Right? It's the first time they're ever going through something like that, or the second time. And so we want to be careful to listen, to have grace, to work through problems. Let them question you without getting offended, right? They're kids. They're asking because they trust you. They're asking because they think you have something valuable to tell them about it, not because they're questioning your authority, right? They might do that at some point too, but we want to let them speak, question you. Let them have the emotions, right? Be vulnerable about your weaknesses. Hey, yeah, I've been there before, right? When they know they can trust you and hear that from them, right? We want to help them to be kids, right? To learn and take that as an opportunity to do that. The last thing for parents when we think about this is this idea of conditional love, right? As parents, we want to be careful to not let anything in our lives make love conditional, right? Any of the things listed above that would cause us to withhold love that we talked about earlier. Man, my mom and dad would never love me if, right? We always want the answer to that to be, hey, I know they're going to love me no matter where I land, is a big deal, right? We don't even want to let that statement get started. And I believe we've lost the ability to have nuanceness, and we need to get it back, where we can say, I love you, even if I disagree with what you're doing. I love you if that's not the way I would have done it. I love you. I'm willing to help you when you're struggling. Right, that's who their family is supposed to be. Most kids aren't just looking for agreement all the time. Sometimes they're just looking for space to fail, figure things out, and process it all. And we get the chance to be that to them. And remember, we do this in the Lord. Right, we're going to need His patience. We're going to need His help. We're going to need the fruits of the Spirit to get through like parenting, and we'll get to do that. It's not just of our own ability to do it. Because some of you are probably even saying, I've never even had a good example of a parent. I don't know how to do any of that, right? And we can look at God and see His love for us and start to show that to them. You'll need to ask forgiveness. You'll need to work hard. You'll shed some tears. All that stuff will be true, but you're also going to be fine. You can do it. When we start to think about this, the bottom line we're getting to with kids is that, if our kids can't trust that we love them, there's not a chance they're going to do anything we say. And that's the goal here, is because when we start to talk about kids here, it says to obey your parents, right? But the obedience part is to be a direct reflection of obedience to Christ. And again, why do we obey Christ? Because we trust Him. We know that He loves us. He's shown us that time and again. And so it's going to be really hard for our kids to obey us if they don't know that we love them. Sometimes you're going to have to make them do things even when they don't feel loved. But as much as we can do to help them feel loved is very, very important. I love this when we talk about kids, right? Obedience of our parents to be reflected. Oh, there you go. That's the thing I just said. Cool, ADD, love that. Obedience to parents, right, is actually the actions that we do, right? Those are the things that when we tell our kids to do it, they're like, we are doing these actions, right? They're going to love us. And I love this verse. It's one that in the Bible, I had some trouble with this. It says that it may go well with you and you may enjoy a long life on the earth, because if not, your mom's going to kill you, right? That was like, I added that on to the end when I was a kid, because I was like, not doing so great at listening and obeying, right? I thought that's what it used to mean. If you don't want your parents to kill you, you should probably listen to them or kick you out, or like, and I always thought my parents were going to kill me. That's really morbid. I don't know what I thought. I was like, I'm going to die of embarrassment or something's going to happen here, right? Like, that was all happening. But what I realized over time is that's what it means is so you can have a long life is because your parents actually know something, right? I know it's hard for some of us here. It's really hard for me to hear, right? Parents who are loving in this way that we just talked about, who are in a marriage that looks like this, or they're achieving to be more like Christ, what's starting to happen is they're aiming you somewhere that is good. They are trying to take you on a journey that's important. They actually have a good plan for you. And that's a little hard to trust, but if they're showing you that and they're working on loving you and doing this, obedience is, they're trying to take you somewhere. And even Jesus has recognized that you're not going to understand it. But if you want like a good shot at life, like you should obey your parents if they're loving you in this way. The second thing it talks about is this idea of honor, which is the attitude that we would have. And this does not mean that over your whole life you have to obey your parents even when you move out and all that stuff, right? Honor looks like respect, right? It looks like sometimes we respect people by doing the right thing. Here's an example. If your parents are just doing something wrong, right? And maybe they don't know Jesus and you do, and you're trying to make sense of how to be the only believer in your family. Sometimes you honor them by continuing to do the right thing, even if they don't understand, right? Later in life, do we obey our parents all the time? No, we do not. I live my own life. I'm a man, right? Like all that stuff, right? I'm like, I live my own life now. But I honor them in how I look at things, looking back, how I speak about them, and I also honor them by continuing to do the right thing, even if they don't understand it. But honor is about the attitude that we would have with our parents there. And so if you're a kid in the room and you have a parent that you still live at home, thinking about asking your parents why is a good idea if you don't understand things. Help get to the place where they can explain it. Parents, just gave them permission to do that. Sorry about that. You can see me in the parking lot afterwards. But we want to give them space to understand why you're taking them where you take them. Sometimes you can't do that. You're like, get your shoes on because I said so, because we got to go, right? That's all. You know that. But over time, create that dialogue. That's going to be really important to you both. Kids, seek to understand your parents. I bet you might be surprised at times as well. So all these things here, when we're thinking about following our parents, we're thinking about following Jesus and letting this affect our family. The question becomes, okay, here's some decent examples. Now, what do we do with this? Because you're like, my family doesn't look maybe anything like that, or I see some areas where I need a lot of work. Good, me too. So we're in the same boat. Here's some things that I think are really important for us. As parents, I would encourage you to talk with your kids, right? Not just like about the surface level things, like create dialogue and space to talk to them about Jesus, to talk to them, right? It's never too late to tell your kids that you're sorry or I love you. I think that we get to a point in life where we're like, yeah, kind of missed the window. I think every kid who maybe didn't hear that enough, or they are waiting for that phone call. They're waiting for it. And I think it will change the fabric of your family, right? And it might change how they parent, right? It's still going to have impact. So don't discount that just because your relationship is different now. Call them. Pick up the phone. It's how you move forward with them. And man, if you're a parent and you're trying to love your kids this way, it starts with loving your wife that way, loving your family, and having a relationship with Jesus. Kids, talk to your parents, giving you the same assignment, right? If you're out of the house, right? Maybe your parents are grandparents now. That's fine, right? Talk to your parents. Maybe you go back and tell them, hey, I thought about this more as an adult now, and I go back. Parents are waiting for those conversations, I guarantee it as well. They're fruitful. It's humanity shown kind of on a level where you can be vulnerable with one another, right? You can talk about how you maybe see it different. And that's part of the honor part, is to say, hey, man, I've changed. I was a kid then. I'm thinking differently now, right? They know that, right? And it's creating the space to talk about some of those things. And if you're a kid now living at home, have that dialogue with your parents. Give them enough honor to actually talk with them about things as well. If you're sitting in the room and you're unhappy with where your family is, you're feeling some distance, you're feeling some dissonance, and this is truly the model with which we change it, right? And the first step to that is actually accepting the love of Christ so we can understand what it is. So if you don't have a relationship with Jesus and you want your family to change, I truly believe that's the first step, is to address you and your heart and the spiritual father who wants to love you, that maybe you have some dissonance with, and you need to talk some things out, right? Christ, this is an entire story of him out to love you in the same way, and it starts with that. And as believers, once you have a relationship with Jesus, right, this is the winning strategy for following Christ, for being a husband or a wife, a parent, a kid. This is the strategy, right? There's lots of other things available to you. Some of them are marginally helpful, but like this thing needs to be the foundation that you build it on, because the love of Christ and his identity that he gives us is what allows us to do this well. Start with your family. Don't start with the rest of the world. It's easy to skip over the family and just get really involved in church and the things and all this stuff. But if you're not doing the work in your family, you're skipping a part of it. And if you go back and work in your family, that will actually allow you to have the maximum impact that you're hoping to have, and you'll have wonderful relationships with your family. So we need to start to do that. This is how we break cycles of abuse, of addiction, of just bad parenting. This is how we change things. It's how you start to change them. And you might not see it right in your lifetime. You might only get a little bit of the way there, but it sets the next generation up for kicking it down the road a little more, right? And you're going to start to see that impact somewhere down the road there. It's how we repair, forgive, start over, all of these things. If you're someone who's not a husband, not a wife, and maybe you want to be, right? This is what you're aiming for, right? You're looking for someone to do this with, if you're looking to have that in your life. If you're not aspiring to be a husband or a wife, that's fine, or a parent, that's also fine. But you need to realize you can have that impact in people's lives, right? You can be a fatherly figure to someone who doesn't have it for whatever reason, or a motherly figure to someone who doesn't have it for whatever reason, right? You can get there with them. You can have this type of impact by showing that through your marriage, through your kids, right? You can bring them into the family, because here's the thing, right? Paul's talking about Christ and the church. As part of the church, we get to be that to others, right? We get to be the example of that. We get to pull them into that when they have no earthly family who loves them this way, right? We get to pull people close and love them that way. And we have to remember that all of us are God's children. And so we are all loved this way. God thinks of us this way. He wants to love us this way. That's who he is. So as you think about this week, I would love for you to consider, wherever you are with it, is there a way that Jesus wants to move me forward in this? Is there something I need to change? Let Christ lead the way in it, and he's going to help you do all of these things. You don't have to do a good job as a parent by yourself. You don't have to be a good husband or wife by yourself. You get to do it with the power of Christ. Let me pray for us. The band's going to give us some time to think about these things, and we would love to hear what you're thinking. If you have questions and stuff, would love to talk with you about that. But man, if we latch onto Christ leading this, I believe we can have a lot of impact in our families. Let me pray. Christ, just thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for the way that you love us continually. Thank you for the body of work you've shown us through your word, the way that you love us, the way that you view us. Thank you for that incredible example. Lord, thank you for promising to help us do that in our relationships with spouses, with kids, and with family, and those around us. Lord, thank you that anything you've called us to do, you also promise to equip us for that, to guide us, to build us up through your Spirit and the body of believers around us. God, we pray that you would meet each person in their time of need right now, whether they're struggling as a parent or in a marriage, or they feel alone. God, that you would come alongside them with your strength that builds them up and will help them to do this. Lord, thank you for your forgiveness and mercy as we walk through this. We love you. Amen.